I never thought the words that would sting the most before my graduation weren't about my grades, my achievements, or even my future, but about a car. Not just any car, a Porsche. And not for me. For my little sister. The same week, my parents told me they couldn't drive 2 hours to Stanford to watch me walk across the stage. They casually announced they were buying Olivia a brand new Porsche as her high school graduation gift. Instead, my father said, I should just take the bus, sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. I'm Madison Clark, 22 years old, just days away from graduating from Stanford Business School. On paper, it sounds like a dream. But behind the headlines, behind the scholarships and late-night study sessions, is a history of being invisible in my own family. And this one phone call, this moment, summed up everything I had carried for years. If you're listening right now, hit that like button, drop a comment if you've ever felt overlooked in your own family, and don't forget to subscribe so you can follow me through this journey. The phone call started innocently enough. I wanted to confirm logistics for graduation weekend. I had imagined them telling me what time they'd arrive, maybe even asking if I wanted to go out for dinner afterward. Instead, my dad's voice cut through the line with the same brusque tone I'd known since childhood. We won't be able to drive you to your ceremony, Madison. We already have plans. I remember clutching the phone tighter, waiting for him to explain. The pause was only a second, but in that silence, I already knew the plans weren't about me. They never were. We're buying Olivia a Porsche. She deserves to celebrate. You'll have to take the bus. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement that this was Stanford, one of the most prestigious schools in the country, and I was graduating at the very top of my class. No pride. Just the same cold dismissal I'd known my whole life, dressed up this time in the shine of a luxury car. For a moment, I couldn't even respond. The absurdity of it was almost laughable, but the ache that followed was sharp and familiar. It wasn't just about the bus or the Porsche, it was about every birthday, every vacation, every report card where the scales were tipped so far in Olivia's favor. I wondered if they even remembered I was their child too. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to respond with a calm, I understand. But inside, I was breaking all over again. Have you ever had that moment where you realized, no matter what you achieved, it would never be enough for the people you most wanted to impress? That's the moment I had right there, sitting on my bed with the phone pressed to my ear. And I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. Maybe for you it wasn't a Porsche or a graduation. Maybe it was the job you worked yourself to death to get, or the relationship you poured your heart into, only to have your family dismiss it like it was nothing. Tell me in the comments, what's your Porsche moment? The moment you knew the recognition you deserved just wasn't coming. The strangest part is that I wasn't even surprised. I should have been angry, but what I felt most was exhaustion. Because this wasn't new. This was a pattern, one that started long before Olivia could even walk. I had been trained to expect less, to carry my own burdens quietly, while my sister's milestones were celebrated with applause, gifts, and grand gestures. But this time felt different. Maybe because I was older, maybe because I was days away from stepping into a new chapter of my life. Instead of crying like I might have as a child, I sat there in the silence after the call, and I made a decision. If my parents couldn't see me for who I was, I would stop trying to make them. I would take the bus, yes. But that bus would be carrying more than just a girl headed to graduation. It would be carrying years of rejection, and it would deliver me to a stage where I would finally stand in my own light, whether they were there to see it or not. It's ironic, isn't it? The very moment that should have crushed me ended up clarifying everything. I realized I didn't need their recognition to know my worth. I didn't need their applause to validate what I had built. Still, I couldn't help but imagine the day itself, me stepping across that stage, my name announced, the world watching, while the two people I had worked hardest for were absent, shopping, in New York with my sister. That picture burned into my mind. And yet, Even in that low point, part of me wanted them to see, wanted them to regret, wanted them to one day look at me with pride, even if it was too late. I think that's the part of us that never dies, no matter how much hurt piles up the child inside who still wants to be chosen. So when I tell you this story, know that it isn't just about a Porsche or a bus, it's about the quiet ways favoritism shapes you, the way being overlooked carves scars that no one else can see. But it's also about resilience, about learning to stand on your own when the people you counted on let you down. That phone call wasn't the end of my story, it was only the beginning of a bigger transformation. Because what my parents didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had been building something behind the scenes that would one day change everything. And it all started long before that phone call, back in the house where I first learned what it felt like to live in someone else's shadow. I grew up in a world that looked perfect from the outside. Our house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was the kind people stopped their cars to admire, with manicured lawns and wide windows that spilled golden light at night. My father, Richard Clark, was the kind of man people described as successful before they knew anything else about him. My mother, Caroline, had the poised elegance of someone who saved lives for a living. Together they built an image of excellence, and for years I thought it was my job to uphold it. Then Olivia was born, and everything shifted. I was 4 years old, still clutching dolls and picture books, when my parents carried her into our home wrapped in a pale pink blanket. I can still remember her tiny fists waving in the air, her big blue eyes blinking at the light of the chandelier. My parents' faces softened in a way I had never seen before. My father leaned down, kissing her forehead, whispering something I couldn't hear. My mother cradled her like she was the most precious thing in the universe. And for me, in that instant, it was as if the sun had turned away. At first, it was subtle, little things. For my 8th birthday, I was handed a stack of fun, educational books, history, math puzzles, logic games. "You're smart, Madison," my father said. "We want to invest in that." I tried to smile, tried to be grateful, because I was old enough to know his approval was rare. But I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting 2 months later, when Olivia turned 4. She had a backyard full of balloons, a pony wearing a crown of flowers, and 20 screaming children dressed like royalty. I sat on the porch that day, watching her ride circles on that little white horse while my mother clapped and my father snapped pictures. I told myself it was because she was younger, that maybe this was just what 4-year-olds needed. But the knot in my chest grew tighter. The differences grew sharper with each year. Family vacations weren't about us as a unit, they were about Olivia's whims. If she wanted Disney World, we went to Disney World. I remember being 12 and begging my mom to send me to a science camp that summer. I'd circled the brochure a dozen times, highlighted the sections about robotics and space exploration. My mother only smiled and patted my hair. "Maybe next year, Madison. Your sister's been asking for Disney again." Next year never came. The worst part wasn't even the missed opportunities, it was the quiet message underneath it all. My wants were negotiable, her wants were absolute. School was no different. I worked myself to exhaustion chasing perfection. Straight A's, every academic club, every competition. I thought if I stacked enough gold stars, they would notice me again. But when the report cards came, my father barely glanced at mine. "That's what we expect from you," he'd say, as if my effort was nothing more than fulfilling a duty. Meanwhile, Olivia came home with B's and C's, and the house lit up with praise. "You tried so hard," my mother would gush. My father would grin, patting her head. "Improvement, that's what matters." I told myself not to resent her. How could I? She was a child too, caught in the glow of their favoritism, but each smile they reserved for her was a reminder of the approval I could never win. By high school, it was no longer a quiet ache, it was a sharp edge I carried everywhere. The memory that still makes my stomach twist came during my senior year. I had clawed my way to the top of my class, named valedictorian after years of late nights and silent tears. I rehearsed my speech over and over, imagining my parents' faces in the crowd, the small chance that this time they would finally look at me with pride. When I reminded my mother of the date, her expression faltered. "Oh, Madison, that's the same night as Olivia's piano recital. She's been practicing for months. You understand, right?" I nodded. Because what else could I do? That evening, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of people, speaking about perseverance, about chasing dreams, about believing in yourself even when no one else does. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it, forcing myself to sound strong. And the whole time, my eyes searched the crowd for two faces that weren't there. The applause at the end washed over me like static. I walked off the stage with my diploma in hand and a hollow pit in my chest. I didn't cry until I got home. Alone in my room, I let the tears fall. Not just for that night, but for every dismissal, every time I'd been told, maybe next year, every moment I had swallowed my disappointment to keep the peace. That night, something hardened inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was resolve. If my parents couldn't show up for me, I would learn to show up for myself. Looking back, I think that was the night I began to understand that excellence in my family wasn't about celebration, it was about expectation. I was the reliable one, the safe bet. Olivia was the golden one, the one who got the applause. And deep down, I realized I might never be able to change that balance. But the thing about growing up in someone else's shadow is that eventually, you learn how to move without light. You learn how to find your own flame, even if it's small at first. And that flame, if you feed it, can turn into something powerful enough to outshine all the neglect in the world. That realization didn't come all at once. It came slowly, in the form of choices I would make, jobs I would take, sacrifices I would endure. And it carried me all the way to Stanford, where the real battle for my future would begin. When I first arrived at Stanford, I carried 2 suitcases, a partial scholarship, and a stubborn determination that I would make it on my own. Most of my classmates arrived in SUVs filled with luggage, parents fussing over them, arms full of shopping bags from Bed Bath and Beyond. My parents hadn't even driven me to campus. I rolled my suitcases across the courtyard myself, pretending I didn't notice the sideways glances from families who seemed to move as whole units, while I stood there, very much alone. My scholarship covered tuition, but nothing else. Housing, meals, textbooks, those were on me. I knew before I ever unpacked that I would have to work. What I didn't know was how much it would cost me. Not just in dollars, but in pieces of my life. My mornings began before dawn, when I tied on an apron and pulled espresso shots for Silicon Valley executives at a cafe 2 blocks from campus. By 9, I sprinted to class, trying not to smell like coffee grounds. In the afternoons, I filed papers as an office assistant, answering phones with a smile that always felt borrowed. Evenings were for tutoring local high school kids who could afford private help. By the time I stumbled back into my dorm room, the sun was long gone, and so was my energy. I remember standing in front of the vending machine one night, counting out nickels for a pack of crackers, wondering how I was supposed to survive 4 years like this. Around me, other students laughed as they ordered Uber Eats, their credit cards effortlessly covering sushi deliveries at midnight. I lived off instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and the occasional free pizza from campus events. Hunger wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Hunger for ease, for belonging, for someone to say, "You don't have to do this all by yourself." That's when I met Sophia Martinez. She was from Arizona, raised by a single mom who worked double shifts as a nurse. I noticed her the first week of class because she sat in the back like me, eyes shadowed with the same exhaustion I felt. We became partners on a group project, and one evening, while we highlighted a used textbook in the library, she confessed she was juggling 2 jobs to cover her rent. "How do you even afford books?" she asked. I laughed bitterly. "I don't, really. I borrow, I share, I hunt for PDFs online." She grinned and slid her copy toward me. "Then we'll share." That night, something shifted. I wasn't the only one living on the edge, and suddenly, I had a friend who understood. Sophia and I became inseparable. We cooked cheap meals together in the dorm kitchen, splitting the cost of rice and beans. We kept each other awake during study marathons, whispered jokes in class to keep from collapsing under the weight of our schedules. She wasn't just my friend, she became my lifeline. And in her presence, I felt the smallest spark of relief. I wasn't entirely alone anymore. Still, the grind wore me down. There were nights I fell asleep on library desks, drool-soaking half-finished notes. Days when my legs ached from running between jobs. Times when my bank account showed less than $20 and I had to decide between laundry or groceries. I lived in the smallest dorm room on campus, my window facing a brick wall. But I told myself it was better than nothing. Each struggle carved resilience into me, though I couldn't see it at the time. The turning point came midway through my sophomore year. I was taking a financial technology elective. Honestly, I'd signed up because it fit my schedule and didn't require buying another expensive textbook. The professor, Catherine Ellis, had a reputation for being sharp, maybe even intimidating. Most students tried to stay invisible in her class. I did too, until the day she handed back our research papers. Mine was covered with red ink, but not in the way I feared. At the bottom she had written, "Graduate level analysis, stay after class." My stomach dropped, sure I was in trouble. But when I approached her, she looked at me with something I rarely saw in adult eyes, genuine interest. "Madison, this work is exceptional. Have you considered focusing on fintech as a career?" I shook my head. "I can't even think past next week's bills." She tilted her head, studying me. "Then maybe you should. Because you have a perspective most of your classmates lack. You understand what it means to solve problems under pressure." That conversation changed everything. For the first time since I left home, I felt seen not as the overlooked child or the broke student, but as someone with potential. Professor Ellis became a mentor, recommending books, guiding my projects, opening doors I never thought I'd be allowed to walk through. She didn't coddle me, but she believed in me, and that belief became a lifeline stronger than any paycheck. It wasn't easy. The jobs didn't go away, the exhaustion didn't vanish. But now I had Sophia's friendship and Ellis's mentorship, two steady hands holding me up as I stumbled forward. And in the quiet moments between work and classes, a new idea began to take shape in my mind. Something bigger than grades, bigger than survival. Something that could change the very industry I was studying. I didn't know it then, but the cracks in my life were about to give way to something far greater. The girl who was barely surviving on ramen and borrowed textbooks was about to discover a spark that would change her trajectory forever. And that spark had a name. Shield pay. By the time my junior year began, I was running on fumes. I had survived 2 years of Stanford by balancing jobs, classes, and sheer willpower. But the truth was, I felt like I was barely hanging on. That's when Professor Ellis's FinTech course came into my life. It wasn't just another class, it was the spark that set everything else in motion. I didn't sign up because I saw myself as an innovator. Honestly, I chose it because it fit into my schedule and didn't require another overpriced textbook. But almost immediately, I realized something was different. Professor Ellis didn't lecture like other professors. She challenged us, pushed us, made us think about money in ways I'd never considered. She didn't just talk about numbers, she talked about systems, about the fragility of trust in the global economy, about how technology was reshaping every part of our lives. I was captivated. For the first time, I wasn't just doing assignments to keep up, I was staying up until 3 a.m., devouring articles, white papers, and forums about cryptocurrency and blockchain. It wasn't about the hype, the headlines of overnight millionaires. It was about the cracks no one was paying attention to, the lack of security, the inefficiencies, the barriers that made it impossible for ordinary people to trust or use digital currencies. One night, sitting in the library with Sophia, I scribbled notes so frantically she finally asked, "What are you even working on?" I looked up at her, the words tumbling out of me. "It doesn't make sense that crypto is supposed to be the future. But it's so unsafe. If I could build a platform that was as secure as a bank but as fast as Venmo? My voice trailed off, but Sophia leaned forward, her eyes wide. Then you'd be unstoppable, she whispered. That was the first time I said it out loud. The idea that would become ShieldPay. Once I gave it a name, I couldn't let it go. I sketched diagrams between classes, coded rough prototypes on borrowed laptops, filled notebooks with equations and possible features. I wasn't just doing homework anymore. I was building something. And with every step, I felt a piece of my old hunger transform into something fiercer. I wasn't just trying to survive at Stanford anymore. I was trying to leave a mark. When Professor Ellis handed back my midterm paper with the words, "This is market-ready thinking," scrawled across the top, she pulled me aside again. "Enter the startup competition," she urged. I froze. "Professor, I can barely pay rent. I don't have time for competitions." She shook her head. "You don't understand. This isn't about a grade. This is about a future. Madison, you've spotted a gap in the market that others are too busy chasing headlines to notice. Don't waste it." For weeks, I wrestled with it. How could I, the girl working 3 jobs to survive, dare to think I could launch a company? But Sophia wouldn't let me walk away. She dragged me to the application office, practically filling out the forms for me. "You're doing this," she said, "even if I have to stand on that stage with you." Preparing for the competition nearly broke me. I was coding between coffee shifts, rewriting my pitch while tutoring students, collapsing onto my dorm bed at 2 a.m. only to wake up at 6 to start again. There were nights I questioned everything. Who did I think I was? Some rich kid with venture capital connections? I was Madison Clark, the girl who was told to take the bus to her own graduation. But maybe, just maybe, that was my advantage. I understood struggle. I understood risk. And I was willing to fight harder than anyone else. The day of the competition, I stood backstage with shaking hands, staring at rows of judges, executives, investors, people who had the power to make or break me. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. Then I remembered my mother's words when I was 12. "Maybe next year, Madison." Not this time. This was my year. I walked onto that stage, took a deep breath, and began. I talked about the flaws in crypto security, about the millions of dollars lost each year to hacks, about the average people who would never trust a system stacked against them. Then I introduced ShieldPay. Faster, safer, accessible. My voice grew stronger with every sentence. By the time I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the applause came, loud and steady, filling my chest with something I had never felt before. When they announced the winners, I nearly fell out of my chair. ShieldPay had taken first place. $50,000 in seed funding, office space at Stanford's Innovation Center, and most importantly, the validation that my idea was worth something. As I held the check in my trembling hands, I thought about every shift at the cafe, every skipped meal, every lonely night in my dorm. For the first time, the sacrifices felt like they were leading somewhere. But the moment that cemented everything wasn't the applause or the prize money. It was when a man in the audience approached me afterward. He was sharp, confident, the kind of person who radiated power. "I'm Victor Huang," he said, extending his hand. "I made my fortune in the early days of social media. And I want to buy your idea, $2 million, right now." My breath caught. $2 million. It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of. Enough to pay off loans, buy a place to live, never worry about rent or food again. The temptation was intoxicating. But something deep inside me whispered, no. This wasn't just about money. This was about proving I could build something with my own hands. "Thank you," I said slowly. "But I'm not selling." Victor raised his eyebrows, then smirked. "Most students would have taken the deal. You're different. Call me when you're ready." The next day, he did call, this time with a different offer. $500,000 for a 15% stake. Not a buyout, but a partnership. I accepted. ShieldPay was no longer just an idea scribbled in my notebook. It was a company. I didn't know then the storms that were waiting for me, the sleepless nights, the near disasters, the moments when everything almost collapsed. But as I signed those papers and shook Victor's hand, I felt the ground shift beneath me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just chasing recognition. I was building a future no one could take away. And that future was about to test me in ways I never imagined. The months after I signed that first investment agreement with Victor Huang were some of the hardest of my life. ShieldPay wasn't just a dream scribbled in my notebook anymore, it was a business with expectations, deadlines, and people depending on me. The euphoria of winning the Stanford competition quickly faded into the grind of trying to build something that actually worked. We started small, just a handful of us working out of a cramped room in the Innovation Center. The fluorescent lights flickered, the Wi-Fi cut out at the worst times, and we had to haul in second-hand chairs that wobbled when you sat on them. Still, it felt like a kingdom to me. Every line of code typed on those borrowed laptops felt like a brick in the foundation of a future no one else believed I could build. But the shine wore off quickly. 3 months into development, we discovered a flaw so severe it threatened to undo everything. Our security protocol, the very heart of ShieldPay, was vulnerable to an exploit. Fixing it meant rewriting nearly half the codebase. I stared at the lines of logic on the screen until my vision blurred, feeling like the walls were closing in. Investors don't wait, customers don't forgive. And my tiny team was already stretched to the breaking point. One of my developers quit the next day, saying he couldn't handle the pressure. I don't blame him, but the timing felt like a knife to the chest. Suddenly, we were short-handed, and deadlines loomed like storm clouds. I barely slept for 4 days, surviving on caffeine and stubbornness, rewriting line after line of code until my hands cramped. There were moments I thought I might collapse, moments where I wanted to call Victor and admit defeat. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I heard Professor Ellis's voice echoing in my head. Every founder has moments like this. The difference is whether you push through or give up. So I pushed. Sophia stepped in to take over administrative tasks, even though she had no background in tech. She stayed up with me at 2 a.m, organizing notes, ordering takeout, reminding me to drink water when my head started to pound. I don't think ShieldPay would have survived without her. And then, one night in March, after endless failures, we finally cracked it. Our proprietary algorithm was not only secure, it processed transactions 30% faster than anything on the market. I remember staring at the test results on the screen, too stunned to speak. Then laughter bubbled up out of me, wild and uncontrollable, until tears blurred my eyes. For the first time, I felt the impossible might actually be possible. When we demonstrated the new system to Victor, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes sharp. "This changes everything," he said. "You're ready for Series A." The next weeks were a blur of pitch decks, flights to New York and San Francisco, boardroom meetings that felt more intimidating than any exam I had ever taken. I walked into rooms full of people in tailored suits who had made and destroyed fortunes with a single decision. My knees shook under the table, but my voice never faltered. I told them the truth. That I wasn't the child of wealthy venture capitalists, that I hadn't been groomed for this world. I was a girl who had worked 3 jobs, who had been told to take the bus to her own graduation. I understood risk because my whole life had been one, and I wasn't afraid to bet on myself. To my shock, they listened. Some even leaned in, intrigued by the grit behind the numbers. After a month of grueling pitches, we closed our first major round of funding, $50 million at a $700 million valuation. My hands trembled as I signed the paperwork, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. ShieldPay wasn't just alive, it was soaring. The news spread quickly. Tech blogs whispered about the dark horse startup coming out of Stanford. Journalists wanted interviews, investors wanted meetings. But I kept my head down. I didn't want attention, not yet. Not until I had built something that could withstand every test. Not until I could stand on my own 2 feet without fear that it would all crumble. By the time my senior year rolled around, ShieldPay had grown to a team of 30 employees. Our beta launch brought in a wave of users, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. One publication even called us the future of crypto security. And when our valuation finally crossed the $1 billion mark, making ShieldPay a unicorn, I sat alone in my dorm room with the official paperwork in my lap and whispered to myself, I did it. But I didn't tell my parents. Not a word. It wasn't out of spite, at least not entirely. Part of me wanted to see their faces when they finally discovered what I had built. When they realized the daughter they had dismissed was leading a billion-dollar company. Another part of me wanted to protect the fragile pride I had finally found. Pride that came from within, not from their approval. Still, even as ShieldPay rose, a storm brewed inside me. Success didn't erase the years of neglect, the emptiness I carried from being unseen. And graduation was coming. I couldn't help but wonder, when the moment arrived, would my parents finally show up? Or would Olivia's world still eclipse mine, no matter how high I had climbed? That question haunted me, even as I prepared for the next chapter of my life. Because I knew the real test wasn't raising millions of dollars or building algorithms. It was facing the people who had never believed in me and proving, once and for all, that I didn't need them to. 3 weeks before graduation, I sat at my tiny desk in my dorm room, carefully addressing formal invitations in neat handwriting. I had imagined this moment for years, the chance to finally stand in front of my family and prove that all the nights of exhaustion, all the loneliness, all the sacrifices had led somewhere. I slipped 3 tickets into the envelope addressed to my parents, one for my father, one for my mother, and one for Olivia. A handwritten note went in too. It would mean the world to me if you could be there. I sealed it with a kind of fragile hope I should have known better than to hold. A week later, as I was leaving the ShieldPay office late at night, my phone buzzed with my father's name on the screen. For a moment, my chest fluttered. Maybe this was it. Maybe they were calling to tell me how proud they were, to plan the trip, to finally show up for me. I answered with a cautious, "Hi, Dad." His voice was as clipped as ever. "We received your graduation invitation." I smiled despite myself. "Yes, I really hope you can make it. It's on Saturday." He cut me off. "We have a conflict that weekend." The words hit like ice water. "What kind of conflict?" I asked, though my stomach already sank with dread. "Olivia's graduation is the same week. Her ceremony is Thursday, but we've planned several activities to celebrate. We're taking her on a shopping trip to New York for her gift. The timing doesn't work for us to drive to California as well." My throat tightened. "Dad, this is my Stanford graduation. It's a big deal." "Of course it is," he said, his tone softening only slightly. "We're proud of you, but you've always been self-sufficient, Madison. You'll handle it just fine on your own." And then he delivered the line that would be burned into my memory forever. "Take the bus. You'll manage." I nearly dropped the phone. My mind whirled. They couldn't fly across the country for me, but they could buy my 18-year-old sister a Porsche and whisk her off to Manhattan for a shopping spree. I tried to respond, but all I managed was a hollow, "I see." From the background, I heard my mother's voice. "Who is it?" "It's Madison," my father replied, not even bothering to mask his distraction. "Tell her we're proud," she called out. "She doesn't need us to hold her hand." The call ended soon after, and I found myself standing frozen on the sidewalk, the city lights around me blurring into streaks. My hand shook as I slipped my phone back into my bag. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I had spent 4 years building a billion-dollar company while carrying a full course load, and still, my parents couldn't spare a weekend. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream into the night sky. Instead, I stood there, hollow, listening to the distant hum of traffic. Eventually, I forced my legs to move, walking toward the bus stop as if fate itself were mocking me. If they wanted me to take the bus, then so be it. I would take the bus. But the betrayal burrowed deep. It wasn't just that they wouldn't come, it was the way they dismissed me with the same cold indifference I'd felt all my life. The message was clear. Olivia was the one to celebrate, the one worth rearranging schedules for, the one worthy of gifts that cost more than most people's homes. I was the responsible one, the self-sufficient one, the daughter who didn't need anything. And yet, some small part of me, no matter how much I hated it, still longed for them to change their minds. I checked my phone obsessively the following days, waiting for an email, a text, any sign of regret. None came. Instead, Olivia posted a picture on Instagram of herself at a luxury boutique in New York, captioned, "Graduation gift shopping begins." A Porsche logo shone behind her in the showroom. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, then tossed the phone aside. The irony cut deep. I had worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, eaten ramen until I could barely stand the sight of it, sacrificed every ounce of normalcy, and all I had ever wanted was for my parents to look at me with pride. Instead, they were busy celebrating mediocrity wrapped in privilege. But beneath the ache, something shifted inside me. If they couldn't see me now, with everything I had achieved, then maybe they never would. And maybe, just maybe, that was the freedom I had needed all along. I made a decision that night. I wouldn't beg for their attention. I wouldn't chase their recognition. I would walk across that stage with or without them, my head high, my heart steady. If they wanted me to arrive by bus, then I would. And when my name was called, when the truth of what I had built was finally revealed, the shock on their faces, if they ever bothered to look, would be louder than any applause. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that their absence was no longer my greatest wound, it was my greatest weapon. And the stage at Stanford would be the place where the balance began to shift. What I didn't realize then was that the revelation waiting for them at my graduation would shake the ground beneath their feet, and nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Graduation morning dawned like a postcard, clear skies, the California sun painting Stanford's campus in warm gold. From the moment I woke, the air felt charged, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. I slipped into my black gown, adjusted the red stole across my shoulders, and stared at myself in the mirror. This was supposed to be the day my family would finally see me, but they weren't there. They were in New York, shopping for Olivia's Porsche. "Still," I whispered to my reflection, "you're ready." Then I grabbed my bag and walked to the bus stop. The bus ride was almost too poetic. A public bus, rattling toward one of the most prestigious universities in the world, carrying a girl her own parents couldn't be bothered to drive. My fellow passengers barely looked at me, though one older woman smiled kindly, as if she sensed the weight I carried. I watched the streets pass by through scratched glass, my stomach tightening with each mile. It wasn't just nerves about the ceremony, it was the knowledge that my parents had chosen absence once again. When I finally stepped onto the Stanford campus, the transformation took my breath away. Crimson banners swayed from every lamppost, white chairs stretched across the lawn in perfect rows. Families clustered together, laughing, snapping photos, hugging their graduates, as though nothing else in the world mattered. I paused for a moment, watching them, a pang of envy cutting through me. Then I squared my shoulders and joined the other students gathering for the procession. The ceremony itself was grand, a swirl of tradition and pride. We marched to the strains of pomp and circumstance, caps swaying, gowns rustling in the breeze. As valedictorian, I knew I'd be one of the first called to the stage. My heart pounded against my ribs, but not from fear of the speech I had rehearsed 100 times. It was from the secret I carried, the truth no one in that audience knew yet. When my name was finally called, Dean Harrison's voice rang out over the microphone. "Madison Clark, graduating summa cum laude, with highest distinction in business administration." I crossed the stage, shaking his hand, accepting the diploma that felt like both a victory and a scar. But then, instead of moving on to the next student, he paused. He looked out at the audience, his expression warm, almost triumphant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it is my extraordinary privilege to share something remarkable." Not only is Madison our valedictorian, but she has also been named by Forbes as the youngest self-made female billionaire in technology. She is the founder and CEO of ShieldPay, a company revolutionizing the security of cryptocurrency transactions. At just 22 years old, she has built a business valued at over $1 billion. For a heartbeat, silence blanketed the crowd. Then a collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by thunderous applause. I lifted my eyes, searching the third row where my family should have been, even though I knew they weren't there. In their absence, I imagined their faces, the disbelief, the shock, the sudden scramble to understand what they had overlooked. My father's program slipping from his hands, my mother's frozen smile, Olivia's wide eyes. Even if they weren't physically present, in that moment I felt them, and I knew the truth would reach them soon enough. I stepped to the podium for my speech, my hands steady despite the roar of applause still echoing. I unfolded the paper I had carried with me, though by now I could recite the words from memory. My voice carried across the lawn. 4 years ago, many of us arrived here with dreams and fears, uncertain of what lay ahead. Some of us had every resource imaginable. Others of us carried nothing but determination. But what we shared was a desire to grow, to push beyond what we thought possible. I paused, letting the silence settle. The weight of my story pressed at the back of my throat, but I chose my words carefully. This was not the time for bitterness, it was the time for truth. I have learned that success is not measured by the recognition we receive, or the wealth we accumulate, but by the obstacles we overcome, and the person we become in the process. Each of us has a unique story of resilience. Mine just happened to involve building a company between classes and discovering that I was capable of more than I had ever been led to believe. The applause that followed was deafening, but it wasn't the sound that struck me. It was the sight of my classmates standing, clapping, cheering. Many of them had no idea until that very moment what I had been building in the shadows. Their faces weren't just congratulating me, they were filled with respect. Respect I had never known from the people who mattered most. As I returned to my seat, my chest felt both light and heavy. Light with pride, heavy with the lingering ache of absence. For the rest of the ceremony, I watched caps fly and families embrace, a bittersweet smile frozen on my lips. And when it ended, when the chairs scraped back and graduates spilled into their families' arms, I stood at the edge of it all, waiting. Not for my parents, they weren't there. But for the moment when the truth of what had just been announced would finally reach them. Because I knew it was only a matter of time before the phone calls began. And when they did, the balance of power in our family would never be the same again. The lawn outside Stanford Stadium was a blur of laughter, camera flashes, and tearful embraces. Families rushed forward with flowers and balloons, hugging their graduates as if the years of sacrifice had been theirs as well. I stood at the edge of it all, holding my diploma against my chest, smiling politely at classmates who stopped to congratulate me, but feeling the hollowness of absence settle in again. Then I saw them, my parents. For a moment I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. My father in his sharp navy suit, my mother in a pale blue dress that shimmered in the sun, and Olivia trailing behind in a designer outfit that looked more suited for Fifth Avenue than a college graduation. I froze, the air catching in my lungs. They hadn't been there during the ceremony. I had scanned the rows a dozen times. But here they were, weaving their way through the crowd, as if they had been there all along. My father reached me first, his arms outstretched in a gesture so unfamiliar it almost startled me. "Madison," he said loudly, as if announcing me to the people nearby. "Why didn't you tell us about all this? $1 billion company? Forbes? This is extraordinary." He pulled me into an embrace, and though his grip was strong, it felt staged, like a performance for the audience around us. My mother followed, her smile practiced and social. "Darling, we are so proud of you. A billionaire at 22, imagine that. You must tell us everything about ShieldPay." Her tone was sweet, but I could almost see the calculations flickering behind her eyes, the rapid reordering of her narrative. For years, she had dismissed me as the independent one who didn't need anything. Now, suddenly, I was a trophy worth displaying. Before I could respond, Olivia spoke. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. She wasn't smiling. Her wide eyes searched mine with something closer to awe than jealousy. "Are you really a billionaire?" I hesitated, then nodded. "On paper, yes. ShieldPay just crossed a $1 billion valuation, and I still own most of it." Olivia let out a low whistle. "That's insane. I always knew you were smart, but this is… wow." Her words landed with an honesty my parents' praise never had. For the first time in years, I felt a crack of something like connection between us. My father quickly reclaimed the moment. "We should celebrate," he declared. "I've made reservations at the French Laundry in Napa. Just the four of us. A family dinner. We'll toast to your success properly." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not pride but strategy. This wasn't about me, it was about association, about him positioning himself as part of my story. My jaw tightened. "Actually, I already have plans. My team organized a celebration tonight. I'll be with them." "I might…" My mother blinked, clearly startled. "Surely you can reschedule. Family comes first." The irony of those words hit me like a punch. I thought of my valedictorian ceremony, the empty seats where they should have been, the countless birthdays overshadowed by Olivia's whims. Family had never come first, not mine at least. I met her gaze evenly. "They are my family. The people who supported me when no one else did. I'm not rescheduling." My father's smile faltered, the edges hardening into the look I knew too well, disapproval masked as authority. "Madison, don't be unreasonable. We came all this way to celebrate with you." I almost laughed. "You came because you read about me in Forbes. Let's not pretend otherwise." The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by Olivia shifting awkwardly beside them. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. "Can I come with you? To your celebration?" She glanced at our parents, then back at me. "I want to see what you've built. I'm tired of being the center of attention all the time. It's exhausting." Her words stunned me. For years I had painted her as the golden child, blind to my pain. Now, here she was, admitting that the pedestal had been its own kind of prison. Something inside me softened. "You're welcome to join," I said quietly. My father's face darkened. "Olivia, we had plans as a family." But Olivia stood her ground in a way I had never seen before. "I want to go with Madison. You two can have dinner without us." For a moment, time seemed to freeze. My mother's eyes darted between us, calculating the social implications, her smile straining at the edges. "Perhaps," she offered delicately, "we could all attend Madison's celebration as a family. It would mean so much to show our support." I shook my head. This isn't a performance. Tonight is for the people who believed in me when no one else did. You're not invited." "But Olivia is, if she wants to come." My father's jaw tightened, his voice low. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad?" "I worked 3 jobs to get through Stanford. I built ShieldPay without a dollar from you. I took the bus to my graduation because you couldn't be bothered to show up. So don't stand here now and act like this is your victory too." His face flushed crimson, but he had no answer. My mother laid a hand on his arm, her voice smoothing the edges. "Of course we're proud of your graduation, Madison. That's what matters most." "Is it?" I asked softly. "Because until Forbes told you who I was, you weren't planning to be here at all." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause I'd heard earlier. Around us, other families tried not to stare, but I saw the curious glances, the recognition of drama unfolding in real time. Then I spotted Sophia waving from across the lawn, our team gathered behind her, their faces lit with pride and excitement. My real family, waiting for me. I turned back to my parents. "I should go," My guests are waiting. I looked at Olivia. If you want to come, we'll be at the Charles Hotel rooftop. You'll be welcome there. My mother called after me as I walked away, her voice sharp with desperation. We're still your parents, Madison. We deserve to be part of your success. I stopped, my back still to them. You can be part of my life going forward, if you want to. But it has to be on different terms. I'm not that desperate little girl anymore. I know my worth. And with that, I stepped into the crowd, leaving them standing there among the scattering families, for once watching me walk away instead of the other way around. What I didn't know then was that this moment was not the end of our story. It was the fracture that would eventually expose everything we had buried for years. And the choices made in the days that followed would shape our family in ways none of us could have imagined. 1 year after graduation, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan penthouse, the city skyline glowing in the last light of day. The glass reflected not just the towers of steel and glass beyond, but also a version of myself I sometimes struggled to recognize. The girl who had once counted coins at a vending machine was now the CEO of a company valued at over $5 billion. ShieldPay had grown beyond my wildest imagining, more than 5 million users worldwide, partnerships with 3 international banks, offices in San Francisco, New York, and London. My days were now a blur of board meetings, investor calls, product launches, and late-night strategy sessions. Yet in the rare moments of stillness, like this one, I still felt the shadow of the girl who had taken the bus to her own graduation. The transformation had not been just financial, it had been deeply personal. Success had forced me to confront the ghosts I carried, and no ghost haunted me more than my parents. After the graduation reveal, they had tried to insert themselves back into my life with alarming speed. My father suggested joining ShieldPay's board, citing his decades of financial experience. My mother offered to arrange glossy magazine spreads about the family behind the prodigy, carefully rewriting history so it looked as though they had been pillars of my journey. For a time I struggled with how to respond. A younger version of me might have leapt at the chance to finally be embraced. But therapy with Dr. Lawson helped me see the truth. They weren't trying to heal the past, they were trying to own my story. I established boundaries. Calls were kept short, visits limited. They could see me on holidays, but only on my terms. I no longer begged for their approval, and that was my greatest freedom. Still, the ache didn't vanish overnight. There were evenings I lay awake, wondering why it had taken billions of dollars for them to suddenly care. Those were the nights I clung hardest to the family I had chosen. Sophia, my anchor and now official COO, and Professor Ellis, who had retired from Stanford but joined ShieldPay as a board advisor. With them, I built something real, a circle of people who believed in me not because of my worth on paper, but because of who I was. The most unexpected change, though, came from Olivia. After the chaos of graduation day, she called me 2 weeks later. "Can we meet?" she asked. Her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. We met at a small cafe in Los Angeles, and what I expected to be a strained, surface-level reunion turned into a 4-hour conversation that unraveled years of silence. She confessed she had envied me, not because of what I achieved, but because of the way our parents demanded perfection from me while lowering the bar for her. It was suffocating, she admitted. I thought being the favorite meant I had it easier, but I felt like a puppet. Nothing I did was ever enough to make them see me for me. For the first time, I realized Olivia had been trapped too, just differently. Her pedestal had been as isolating as my neglect. When she admitted she didn't even want the Porsche, that she had only accepted it because it seemed expected, I saw her not as my rival but as another casualty of our parents' warped idea of love. I encouraged her to take time, to figure out what she wanted for herself. 2 months later, she deferred her UCLA enrollment and shocked our parents by returning the Porsche. Instead, she volunteered with a marine conservation program in Hawaii, working with sea turtles and local communities. When she came back, sun-kissed and brimming with stories, she told me, I want to try living the Madison way, on my own terms. So I invited her to move into the guest suite of my penthouse. It wasn't just about offering her a place to stay, it was about giving us a chance to rebuild what had never been allowed to grow before. Living under the same roof as adults, we discovered how much we had missed. We cooked meals together, shared late-night conversations, and even argued like sisters for the first time, not rivals in a rigged competition. Slowly, the distance shrank, and in its place, something new bloomed: genuine friendship. At the same time, I poured my heart into the Shield Pay Foundation, which dedicated 10% of our profits to scholarships for students like me, bright, ambitious kids without family support. But these weren't just tuition scholarships. We covered rent, food, technology, even mental health counseling, because I knew the hidden costs of survival. I sat in on interviews, reading essays from students who reminded me so much of myself it ached. One wrote, "I'm used to being invisible. I just want one chance to prove I matter." I circled her name and whispered, "You do." The foundation became my proudest achievement. Every acceptance letter we sent felt like rewriting my own history, ensuring no other student would have to choose between textbooks and groceries the way I had. Sophia oversaw daily operations, and Olivia threw herself into environmental initiatives, steering part of our funding towards sustainable technology. For the first time, I saw her alive with purpose, not just existing under our parents' gaze. Yet, even as I built this new life, the tension with my parents lingered. They called more often, trying to inch past the boundaries I had set. My father couldn't accept that I didn't want his financial guidance. My mother couldn't accept that I wouldn't let her parade me as her success story. And though part of me longed for reconciliation, another part knew the truth. Forgiveness wasn't about pretending the past hadn't happened. It was about choosing not to let it control my future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Olivia burst into the living room holding her tablet. "The foundation committee approved all 5 new scholars," she said, her eyes glowing. "Including that girl from Arizona, the one working 3 jobs. She reminds me so much of you." I smiled, my chest swelling with something deeper than pride. "Make sure she knows she won't have to take the bus to her graduation," I said. "We'll send a car." Olivia laughed. "Or maybe a Porsche." We laughed together, the sound of it filling the room like a healing we never thought possible. But even in that warmth, I knew our story wasn't finished. My parents were still out there, circling, waiting for their chance to reclaim a role in my success. And sooner or later, I would have to face them again, this time not as the overlooked daughter, but as a woman who finally understood her own worth. Looking back now, I realize my story was never about the billion-dollar valuation, or the Forbes cover, or the headlines that called me a prodigy. Those things are milestones, yes, but they are not the essence of what I've lived through. The true story lies in the nights I thought I couldn't go on but did anyway. The years of silence from my parents that taught me to speak for myself. The weight of being invisible that forced me to carve out my own light. For so long, I thought success meant finally earning their recognition. But what I've come to understand is that the real triumph was learning to stop chasing it. I used to believe I was broken because I wanted love that never came. What I've learned is that it wasn't me who was broken, it was the way my parents measured worth. They saw value only in what could reflect well on them. For years, I bent myself into impossible shapes to try to fit into that frame. But the day I stopped doing that, the day I decided to build my own story instead of begging to be written into theirs, was the day I became free. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take away from this, it's this. You do not need the approval of the people who refuse to see you. You may spend years chasing it, convincing yourself that if you just work harder, just shine brighter, just achieve more, they will finally turn their heads and say, "We're proud of you." But sometimes they won't. And that doesn't mean you are less. It means you are strong enough to stand on your own. The greatest gift neglect ever gave me was resilience. It taught me how to fight when no one was cheering. It forced me to build a chosen family, friends, mentors, teammates who became more loyal and supportive than blood ever was. And it taught me that validation given conditionally is not validation at all. The people who are meant to love you will do so without keeping score, without needing you to prove your worth again and again. Now, when I stand in front of students applying for our scholarships, or young entrepreneurs pitching their ideas, I see myself in their eyes. I tell them, you don't need to wait for permission. You don't need to wait for someone else to call you enough. Start now, build anyway. Believe anyway. Because the truth is, the moment you stop waiting for recognition is the moment you unlock your true potential. That doesn't mean the pain disappears. There are still nights when memories of being overlooked rise like old ghosts. But instead of letting them drag me down, I let them remind me of how far I've come. Pain is part of the story, but it is not the ending. The ending is choice. The choice to turn hurt into fuel, silence into voice, neglect into independence. So here I am, 1 year after the girl who took the bus to her own graduation. I have money, yes. I have recognition, yes. But more importantly, I have peace. I have a sister who has become my friend, a team that has become my family, and a foundation that is giving to others what I once needed most: a chance. And when I think of that girl sitting alone at her valedictorian ceremony, scanning the crowd for faces that never came, I wish I could tell her this: you don't need them to clap for you. You're already enough. If you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or made to believe that your value is conditional, I want you to remember this: your worth is not up for negotiation. It does not shrink because someone else refuses to see it. It is yours, unshakable, untouchable. And when you finally step into it, the world cannot help but notice. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their light doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. And tell me in the comments, what's the moment in your life when you realized your worth didn't come from others, but from within yourself?